Ever feel like you have a million ideas,
Yeah.
just like bouncing around in your head? Well, today, we're going to dive deep into the world of someone who, kind of embodies that feeling. Tommy Elvkile. He's a 23-year-old inventor with a head full of crazy contraptions and a heart set on, like, building entire worlds.
Yeah, and what's really cool is we've got this really unique set of sources for this deep dive. It's like we're getting a 360-degree view of this guy. We've got his character descriptions, his like personal reflections, even glimpses into conversations he's had with friends.
It's kind of wild, right?
Yeah.
Like, we're getting to peek inside his brain, which, let me tell you, from what we can tell, is a pretty interesting place to be.
Yeah.
I mean, Tommy, you actually described world building as, and I quote, the ultimate hobby. And it's so clear you're not just talking about, fantasy landscapes and stuff. You're digging into history, science, culture, like everything.
Right. And it's fascinating, right? Because world building, it forces you to understand how all those different elements, they interact, how they influence each other. It really speaks to like your curiosity and that drive to connect ideas that on the surface seem totally random.
Totally. And you even said it yourself, Tommy. You want to learn about everything. Talk about a thirst for knowledge. Plus, we noticed this snowflake thing popping up, this motif in your descriptions. It's like this belief that your creations, they are totally unique, totally intricate, one of a kind.
Which is actually a fascinating contrast, though, right? Because, yeah, your ideas, they're incredibly detailed. But you've also mentioned struggling with focus, with actually following through. It's this constant battle between that burst of inspiration and the challenge of actually, making it real.
Well, we've all been there. That struggle is so real. You even mentioned in your notes, Tommy, that feeling of always wanting to start something new before the last thing is even finished. It's like, it's the creative dilemma.
Totally. It's that classic tension between the allure of a fresh start, right, versus the discipline it actually takes to see something through, to really finish it. But it's important to note here, you're not just accepting this challenge, right? You're actively working on it. That goal of yours to finish that game you've been developing, that says a lot.
It really does. It shows real self-awareness and that desire to grow, which honestly, that's pretty inspiring. Okay, so let's talk about the people in your life, Tommy. You're not just this, like, lone wolf inventor, right? You've got friends, rivals, even a love interest.
And the sheer number of people that you're like interacting with, it really speaks to this desire for connection, bouncing ideas off of others, sharing your creations.
And speaking of sharing, we got to talk about Liz. Now, Liz is a fascinating character in her own right. Probably deserves her own deep dive someday. But her dynamic with you, Tommy, it's really something else. We see this like playful, almost unexpected side of you come out in your interactions with her.
Yeah. It's a great example of how, relationships can really reveal those hidden parts of ourselves, those parts we don't always show.
Totally. Like that scene with the dollhouse.
Oh, yeah. Where Liz takes on that surprisingly dominant role.
And you, Tommy, are totally on board. Which, honestly, that took us by surprise. It shows a willingness to explore, to, like, challenge those preconceived notions,
For sure. Now, contrast that with your relationship with Val, which feels much more like grounded in these deep, meaningful conversations, this mutual support.
Right, you and Val really get into it, like those heart-to-heart conversations, often delving into these complex topics like societal expectations, gender roles, that kind of thing.
And what's really interesting is that through those conversations, we start to see a different side of you, Tommy, a certain vulnerability.
Yes, exactly. Like when you were working on that futuristic vehicle together, and you opened up to Val about feeling self-conscious, like not fitting into those traditional masculine stereotypes,
It was a really honest moment, and it actually leads perfectly into the next layer we wanted to explore, your internal world, Tommy.
Sure.
Because under that cheerful inventor exterior, there's this depth of emotion that you don't always show.
Right, and you've actually been pretty open about that in your reflections.
Yeah.
You mentioned, Tommy, how tough it is to express vulnerability, especially given your upbringing. And we see that in how you kind of like tiptoe around Val during that conversation about gender roles, almost like you're afraid to, I don't know, challenge her perspective or something.
Yeah, like you're grappling with this pressure to appear strong, to be put together, even when you're dealing with these really complicated emotions. And honestly, that's something that resonates with a lot of people, especially those who, like you, want to connect with others, leave a positive mark on the world,
Totally. It's like you're trying to balance that need to be your authentic self with this fear of causing offense, disrupting things. And that brings us to this really intriguing part of your world building, Tommy. The Uno card Ice Hawks.
Oh man, that little detail, the ice hawks and how it goes all the way back to your childhood, fascinating. You created these intricate backstories for all of them, every single player. It's like this early form of world building, right?
So, I mean, do you see any, like, parallels there, Tommy, between the Ice Hawks and the worlds you're creating now? Like, is there a connection between you as a kid just, like, poring over those details and the imaginary friend you still have today?
It's such an interesting thing to think about, you know, because we tend to think of world building as this like external process, right?
Yeah.
But this kind of hints at something deeper, something more personal. It's like these worlds, they're a refuge, a space for you to explore, well, yourself, I guess, and the way people work, interact.
And, that actually makes me think about how you described your invention process, Tommy. You talked about getting lost in the details, like spending hours on a single gear or function before you even, like, think about the bigger picture.
Yeah, it speaks to like a real meticulousness, a real dedication to the craft, you know, but it also makes me wonder, is it connected to that desire to control the narrative, to create these worlds where everything, and I mean everything, is exactly how you envision it?
Especially with how important legacy seems to be to you, Tommy. You said you want to leave a positive mark on the world, be remembered for what you create.
Which, hey, totally a noble goal. But it does beg the question, right? Does that pressure to create something lasting, does that play into your struggles with actually finishing things? Like, is there a fear that if it's not perfect, it's not worth sharing, not worth remembering?
That's a really good point. Makes me think about how you handle feedback, Tommy. You seem to really, really crave connection, collaboration, but you've also said you're sensitive to criticism.
Yeah, you mentioned feeling like deflated when a friend didn't totally get one of your inventions. All the detail. It's almost like you're looking for validation, not just for the finished product, but for all the thought, all the imagination behind it, right?
For sure. It's like you're inviting people into your world, but you're also, like, kind of worried they're going to mess it up,
There.
change the order of things.
Which, again, circles back to that vulnerability we were talking about. It's like you're putting your heart and soul into these creations, making yourself incredibly vulnerable in the process.
And in a world that often sees vulnerability as a bad thing, as weakness, it's it's understandable why you'd hesitate to let people see that side of you,
Yeah.
even the people closest to you.
But here's the thing, Tommy. Vulnerability, it's not weakness. In fact, I think it's often where our greatest strengths come from. It takes real courage to be open, to share your authentic self with the world. Imperfections and all, right?
And that's what makes your story so relatable, Tommy. You're dealing with, like, universal stuff. The need to create, the fear of judgment, wanting to connect with people, and you're doing it with this self-awareness, this willingness to grow. That's huge, honestly.
And, you know, as we like really dig into your world here, we keep seeing this theme, duality. You're kind of a paradox, you know?
Right. You're this meticulous inventor, obsessed with detail, with world building, and yet finishing those projects is a struggle. You crave connection, validation, but shy away from vulnerability and criticism. It's like you're always trying to balance these totally opposite forces, Tommy.
And maybe that's where the real magic is, you know?
Yeah, because maybe it's in those contradictions, those tensions that we really figure out who we are.
Think about it. You're fascinated by like futuristic tech, right? But you also love classic literature.
And you want to build these, like, immersive worlds that just transport people.
Mhm.
But at the same time, you're dealing with the complexities of your own, like, inner world, right?
Yeah. It's true. And those dualities, Tommy, they don't take away from how brilliant you are. They add to it. They make you relatable. They make you human.
It reminds us that, like, growing isn't about erasing those parts of ourselves, the contradictions. It's about figuring out how to be okay with them.
Totally. It's about embracing like all of it, the good and the bad, the creative bursts, the self-doubt, the planning, the detours.
Because it's all those things, those seemingly opposite forces that make you, this unique, complex individual.
And that individual, Tommy, all those quirks, those contradictions, that's what makes you so fascinating to unpack.
So as we, like, wrap up our deep dive into your world, Tommy, we want to leave you with this. What if those vulnerabilities you've been trying to hide, what if they're actually the key? The key to unlocking this, like, next level creativity in you?
What if by embracing those parts of yourself, those fears, those insecurities, you discover this whole new well of inspiration?
Because honestly, true innovation, it rarely comes from a place of perfection.
Yeah.
It comes from, like, this raw, unfiltered, realness.
So keep creating, Tommy. Keep exploring, and don't be afraid to let your guard down a little. Let the world see the real you. You never know what you might find.
And that's our deep dive on Tommy Elvkile, everyone. We'll see you next time for a brand new deep dive.